Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, after yesterday's analysis of Canadian intelligence's latest report that revealed India as one of the greatest threats to Western democracies, did you know that we in the West are totally reliant on this same hostile nation for our medicines that keep us alive when we're sick? So today I'm going to do a deep dive into this shocking revelation that has us completely at the mercy of India. We'll also take a look at the complex relationship as a result between the US and India, and as Trump tries to leverage India's help in combating the illegal flow of opiates into the US that's killing so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of US citizens. And what does this mean for Sikhs and the Khalistan movement? A good question that we'll try to answer. And did you know that over 13,000 women in Maharashtra have voluntarily had hysterectomies to stop menstruating so they don't lose days off work and therefore lose a day's pay? So why are women still scandalously seen as third-class citizens in India? And the US mayor asked King Charles now. He asked King Charles recently to return the Koh-i-Noor diamond to India. But does it really belong to India? Well, I know a few Sikhs who may think otherwise. We'll trace the history of one of the world's most famous diamonds and try to work out just who, if anybody indeed, has a claim on it. All this and more on today's show. And of course, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up beneath the videos. So thank you, as always, to my wonderful audience for that. Right, so let's get underway. And there was an interesting headline just the other day in one of the right-wing newspapers. And it really caught my eye, and it's a bit of an eye-opener, to be honest. And many of you might have seen similar headlines in recent times. It is a bit of an alarm call, really, and it's something that many people just don't even understand or realise. That the United Kingdom and other Western nations are really on the edge of a medical precipice, because we are critically vulnerable to China's control, ultimately, over the world's antibiotic supplies. Now, I mentioned India and I mentioned China, and I'll talk about why those two are inextricably linked together and why India, therefore, is ultimately holding us in the West to ransom. It's a story that is, well, it's designed to make you feel a little bit helpless, to make you think that all our healthcare systems here in the West are basically being held hostage. So, there is a massive piece of the puzzle that the mainstream media doesn't really touch on, or arguably might even be too compromised to mention. China might well be the source of the raw materials, but the real conduit, the actual hand that holds the medicine bottle, let's call it, is not China, it is India. So in other words, it's not just a China story, this. It is a story about a very dangerous, tangled web of dependency that our leaders, our globalist leaders, you know who I refer to primarily when I use the word globalist, but our globalist leaders have woven this tangled web of dependency around us and wrapped us all up in it. We've basically traded our domestic manufacturing for a middleman that our own intelligence services in the West, including, as I said in yesterday's show, CSIS, have formally labelled as a main perpetrator of foreign interference and espionage. In other words, a hostile nation. So we might well worry about China shutting off the taps at the source, but we're ignoring a very important fact that we've basically handed the keys to our national health to a government that actively uses coercive tactics or worse to suppress criticism, create fear within our communities. That CSIS report, the Canadian Intelligence Report, which I went into great detail yesterday, is a wake-up call that perceived threats to domestic stability drive India to reach across borders into our politics, media, and indeed, of course, onto our streets. So ask yourself, if India is willing to engage in transnational repression to silence a political movement, what then stops India from using their status as the world's pharmacy to pressure our governments during a diplomatic crisis, to impose its interests on our government policy, because it holds us under ransom? So when we talk about sovereign health, we're talking about the right to live without being blackmailed by a foreign power, and a potentially hostile foreign power, that views our democratic freedoms as a threat to itself. And this is why the Sikh community need to basically itself sit up and take notice of this, because ultimately our own government could potentially be held hostage by India over simple control of our medicines, and therefore impose Indian interests over policies here in the West. So today I'm going to go a little bit beyond the sort of the headlines in the Daily Mail, and we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive. I want to unmask this conduit that is India. We're going to show you how our health in the West, our security even, and the campaign for even a sovereign Khalistan are all part of the same fight that's wrapped up in this discussion. So this infographic here, this gives you hopefully a little bit of a sort of workflow, should we say, in the antibiotics supply chain. So to truly understand this antibiotic, this medicinal trap that's been built, we've got to move past this simplistic idea that we just buy pills from China. It is more complex than that. The reality is much more complex. It is basically, it's a three-way triangle of dependency that's been engineered, sadly, by decades of globalist policy. This is the middleman strategy, and India sits right at the centre of it. India is that middleman, that key to this whole sort of triangular dynamic. So the process starts in China, which has very successfully monopolised the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs as they're known, active pharmaceutical ingredients. So they produce the raw materials, the source. So these are the raw chemical building blocks, essentially the soul of the medicine, the important bits. And because of China's lower environmental standards and massive state subsidies, they've basically driven Western producers out of the market. And as an example of that, I'll give you some facts and figures. In the manufacturing of penicillin, pretty much all global penicillin is manufactured in China. It's grown, or whatever the right terminology is. It's nurtured in China. This is because all the Western producers were driven out of business because the Chinese government subsidised up to 80% of the price of penicillin production. So how on earth could Western normal capitalist companies compete with that? They couldn't. So they went out of business, which now means that virtually all penicillin production is sourced in China because that simple, you could almost call it illegal, that commercial mechanism where they literally just dropped the price through subsidies, literally drove virtually every single penicillin provider in the West out of business. And therefore, in one simple move, wrapped up a penicillin monopoly over the world. Apparently there's only one European supplier who actually home grows penicillin in Europe, in Austria, a small company in Austria. Everybody else gone out of business. Anyway, but this is what China does very successfully, why it monopolises so many things. But China doesn't usually ship that finished pill to your local Boots or Walgreens, Boots here in the UK, Walgreens in the US, or your local equivalent. Instead, the raw materials, the raw chemicals are shipped to India. India has branded itself as the pharmacy of the developing world. It possesses a massive industrial infrastructure dedicated to the formulation. That is the process of turning those raw chemicals into the pills that we now take out of the packet. Capsules, the syrups, whatever, the medicines basically you buy on the shelves. So they're basically put together in India. And of course, by sitting in the middle, as the middleman, India gains an extraordinary amount of geopolitical leverage. So the UK, the US, all of us here in the West, we look at China as a strategic rival. And we've traditionally viewed India as a partner to then help offset Beijing's growing power. I often say, we need India as a buttress to China's power. But as that CSIS report, and no doubt the CIA, MI6, all our intelligence agencies know full well, that partnership that we're trying to nurture with India, it comes with a very dark underbelly, a very dark secret, essentially. And the CSIS report explicitly stated that India has cultivated covert relationships with Canadian and Western politicians and journalists to advance, obviously, its own interests. Not our interests, its citizens, but India's interests. So if 80% of our generic antibiotics and medicines are finished in Indian factories, India basically holds a kill switch for Western healthcare. Switch it off. What can we do about it? Absolutely nothing. And CSIS in that report noted that India acts aggressively to counter perceived threats to its domestic stability, including, of course, the Khalistan movement. So you can start to see why this simple, sad, tragic situation, unacceptable situation, actually also has a direct impact on the Khalistan movement. Because Indian interests can now be imposed upon our governments. Just through this simple blackmail, we'll press the switch and stop supplies of antibiotics to your nations. If you don't suppress the Khalistan movement. It's simple. So why do these globalists keep quiet about this? Why is this such a secret? They don't want this to come out, obviously. And this is why, basically, people like Mark Carney, who are regularly criticised as a globalist, and his corporate lobby, the World Economic Forum, or that whole group, they're so desperate to keep India in their good books. Because they're not just protecting trade, they're protecting this critical supply chain that we have become too weak to maintain ourselves. They know that if Canada or the UK or the US or Australia, New Zealand, all of us, Europe, if we push back too hard, then, particularly on things like transnational repression, if we call them out on their human rights abuses, then the surveillance, coercive tactics India uses to create fear in our societies, the middleman just simply slows down the shipments, just slowly strangulates our medicine supplies. Well, you know what that means, obviously. People start dying. India knows that we here in the West are medically compromised. They know that as long as we need their factories to keep our hospitals running, our pharmacies' shelves full, our leaders will then continue to dance around the uncomfortable facts that CSIS report revealed. They mentioned the Air India bombing, Khalistani extremism in very ambiguous terms, because in reality, CSIS likewise are terrified of offending the hand that feeds us our medicine. We've basically, in the West, we have traded our medical sovereignty for a fragile peace with a middleman that's currently operating against our national security interests. So we're not just dependent on China's chemicals, we're dependent on India's permission to be healthy. What a mess that we have got ourselves in through our globalist leaders. They are behind this. And it's not just a problem that we have here in Britain, as that sort of original Daily Mail article highlighted. It's an American problem. It's a problem for all of us. It is a global diaspora crisis. And to understand the scale of the sovereignty debt, essentially, you can call it, that we've incurred, we've got to look at some cold, hard numbers. Today, India, via China, together control 90% of the world's supply of generic medicines. So, if you're sitting in London, Toronto, New York, wherever, if you reach for a basic antibiotic, there's a 9 out of 10 chance that its journey began in a Chinese laboratory and ended in an Indian factory. But unfortunately, it's not just about medicine. It mirrors, in fact, the exact same stranglehold that China has, for example, over rare earth metals, the minerals that we need, that are essential for our technology, for everything from smartphones to advanced guidance systems in our own missiles, etc. We've basically allowed ourselves to become a civilization that cannot heal itself or defend itself without the permission of our potential enemies. What a mess. So, China produces the vast majority of chemical precursors for antibiotics, like amoxicillin. India supplies 40% of all generic drugs used in the US alone. In rare earth metals, China controls roughly 85% of the world's processing capacity for rare earth elements, creating a vulnerability in our tech sector that is identical to the medical one. And again, why have we let this happen? It's not about efficiency. The CSIS report highlights how India uses covert influence to cultivate relationships with Western politicians. So it brings up an uncomfortable question, doesn't it? Are our politicians blind, or are they bought? When we see Western leaders staying completely silent about transnational oppression, staying silent, never calling out these coercive tactics used against, for example, the Sikh diaspora, when they ignore Jagtar Singh Johal's situation, the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, etc., etc., the human rights abuses that go on in India, you've got to wonder, are they in the pocket of powerful lobbying groups from Delhi and, of course, Beijing? The answer is yes, they are, clearly. They're not stupid, they're not blind. So that by a process of elimination, it's very clear what's going on with our leadership and our governments. And the CSIS report noted specifically that foreign powers use, quote, financial incentives and community proxies to influence our democratic processes. So the answer is between the lines, and it screams obviously what it is. So by allowing our supply chains for things like medicine and technology to be offshored to China and India, our leaders have handed these regimes a silent veto. In other words, complete control over our foreign policy. So every time a politician brushes things under the carpet to protect a trade deal, you know why? They're paying interest on a debt that is costing us our sovereignty. It stinks, in other words. We've been taken for a ride by our own governments. And it does lead on to, really, I have to say, the most unpredictable and difficult part of this whole sort of discussion in the current landscape. Donald Trump, and what is Trump's agenda? I am a generally speaking supporter of Trump. I don't support everything he stands for, but I always cheered his arrival because he arrived and shook up the establishment, an establishment that was very cosy in its status quo, and it really did need a kick up the backside just to remind it who it's supposed to represent. Us, remember us, the people that voted for you. Anyway, but yeah, Trump's agenda. What is it all about? And ironically, this is the beauty of Donald Trump. He is utterly unpredictable. He is a maverick in the true sense of the word. And this is what makes him so effective, is because literally nobody knows what he's going to do next, even his own people. And this is why, ironically, he gets results. Because people are terrified of him, to put it simply. But yeah, so when it comes to India, it does mean we're in a very, very unpredictable and complex situation. And just in literally over the last day or two on X, social media, the activity from the US's ambassador in India, a guy called Eric Garcetti, we've featured him before actually on the show. You see this classic State Department face. It's all smiles, talk of shared values, essential partnerships between the US and India. But of course, beneath that diplomatic veneer, that layer of diplomatic language, there's a bit of a storm brewing. Now, we know Trump, by his very nature, he's a deal maker, he's a businessman. But also, he has this America First doctrine that is absolutely overrides everything. America First. It is built basically on the destruction of foreign dependencies. In other words, America First, we will destroy and remove any dependency that we in America have on anybody else. And everything that he does, you can see, is driven by that simple agenda. He's been very, very vocal about the drug trade, destroying America, the fentanyl and the drug precursors. And the media just think he's only primarily talking about the drug cartels in Mexico or Colombia or whatever, South America. But his advisors have been very clear. The chemical supply chain is the root of the problem. Now, much of the focus on this chemical supply chain, this is about the fentanyl precursors. And again, it's a story we have covered in the past on the show. Much of the focus on this is on China, but the transshipment, the supply chain and the processing, once again, often involves India. India, once again, is the conduit to this. Now, Trump has signalled that he wants to kill the foreign drug trade by bringing pharmaceutical manufacturing back to the US, America first. Now, essentially, this is a pharmaceutical repatriation of the supply chain, bringing it back to America, so we manufacture these things in America. So basically, it would bypass that India-China triangle completely. It solves the problem, essentially. So that is driving, potentially, what's going on in that arena. Now, this is where the Khalistan campaign, it will come back to the Khalistan campaign, because it does obviously have an indirect but powerful indirect impact on the Khalistan campaign, and potentially an opening. We always look for the silver lining in these complex geopolitics and this landscape that we're always looking for the cracks that we can exploit from the Khalistan movement's perspective. Trump isn't interested in the polite diplomacy, that's an understatement, that allows India to conduct its transnational oppression while we buy their generic drugs. If India is ultimately seen as a bad actor, and Trump will see this, if he sees India as a bad actor that uses its pharmaceutical power, its leverage, its blackmail to hide it, to shield its covert influence operations, particularly in the US, Trump is exactly the kind of leader who will just say, right, that's it. No, pulling the plug. It's all over. Ended. We're not having this. This is the balls, to put it frankly, that Trump has, that no other Western leader would have the courage to stand up and do. Ironically, Trudeau, as a Liberal, and I say ironically because Trudeau and the Liberals are never usually seen as having, frankly, the backbone to do something like that. But as I often say, to give Trudeau his credit, Trudeau was one of the few leaders in the West to stand up, even to his own political detriment, to stand up against India and call it out. But Trump does. Trump will have that. No doubt has the backbone to do that. So the CSIS report, this report, tells us that advocacy for Khalistan is lawful political activity. It was unambiguous, despite, as many of you have noticed, even in the comments, I think, after yesterday's show, you're noticing across social media, the Godi media and the Hindutva social media, they're all over this report saying, oh, it's Khalistani extremists, ignoring, obviously, actually the truth in the report. Well, it's saying it's not Khalistani extremists, it's India that is the real threat. So, I mean, again, it just proves the disinformation that comes out of the Godi media and Indian media. They picked up this report and they've basically spun it into something completely different. In other words, just total misinformation. Anyway, so ultimately, this report says that the Khalistan movement is lawful political activity. Now, if the Trump administration decides that India's coercive tactics, its illegal activities that are, again, highlighted unambiguously in this report, so if Trump sees this as acting against the US's own diaspora and a violation of the America First principle of sovereignty, then that relationship between Washington and New Delhi could just dissolve overnight. You know how impulsive Trump is. He literally could wake up one morning and say, you know what? Nah, not putting up this with India. It's over, finished. Trump does not like being dependent upon anyone. So when Trump discovers this, as I'm sure he probably is aware of it, but when he decides to act on this complete dependency of medication on India, he's going to say, you know what? We don't need this. We don't want it, and I'm not going to have it. If he sees India holding the keys to the US's medicine cabinet, but at the same time, India up to their nefarious operations on North American soil, Gupta Singh Panoon is a prime example, he's not going to brush things under the carpet any longer. He's going to use it as leverage to break that Indian monopoly once and for all. So again, we're not there yet, but one day Trump's going to wake up to this, I have no doubt. And we're talking about this, the sort of complex dynamics of US and really Western relations with India. This is obviously inextricably linked to organised crime. It's not just about politicians or diplomacy, the diplomats. It is about basically the dirty work that's being done by India's proxies. Now, this report, as we said, it does obviously refer to the Bishnoi gang as a prime example. There are transnational criminal organisations and cartels operating under Indian government guidance, as stated in this report. So why is a criminal gang listed in a national security report alongside ideological extremists? Because the lines have now blurred. Basically, CSIS explicitly identifies India as a perpetrator of transnational oppression, using all these tactics, but also the people like the Bishnoi gang. So the listing of the Bishnoi gang was significant. It was hard-hitting. It was a hard-hitting admission, and it was very, very significant. It's suggesting that the covert relationship India is cultivating with all sorts of bad actors here in the West, it's not just these relationships that they're nurturing are not just with journalists and politicians. It is with the criminal world. No surprise, we've been talking about it for a long time. And of course, it is those very same criminal elements that control the flow of things like these illicit drugs, the fentanyl precursors, etc. So again, all this feeds in, the Bishnoi gang and their criminal activities feed into the same whole context. So if we go back to this antibiotics trap that we've found ourselves in, if India is indeed the conduit for the medicines, and they are simultaneously working with transnational criminal organisations, then we basically, here in the West, have a catastrophic security flaw. We have a catastrophic security crack in our defence. Criminal proxies can now disrupt supply chains or intimidate workers without a single Indian diplomat having to take the blame. In other words, it's plausible deniability. India's paying, essentially, people to do its dirty work, to destroy our security defensive. And CSIS noted that India acts to counter perceived threats to its domestic stability. Well, of course, who is that? Including the Khalistan movement. And that includes, therefore, pressuring our governments and our state bodies to suppress the lawful non-violent advocacy for Khalistan. So this is the reality of 2026 now. This is today. Your life-saving medicine is flowing through a conduit that is increasingly linked to the same illegal activities used to suppress the Khalistan movement and the Sikh community. So this middleman of India isn't just a businessman. In many cases, it's a mobster. So, again, just focusing to wrap this up on the Khalistan discussion. You know, we've shown you the dependency that we in the West now have on India for pharmaceuticals, the trap that we've found ourselves, and of course the dirty tactics that India uses influencing our politicians. So where does this leave the Khalistan movement? You know, is there hope? Well, the hope, obviously, as always, lies in the truth. For years, the Khalistan movement has been the canary in the coal mine. How many thumbnails have I put up on YouTube saying, we warned you, Sikhs have warned you. Sikhs have always been there, being one of the few lone voices out there to warn our governments of what is going on, particularly when it comes to India. The community has been warning Western governments for decades, actually, that India is not the vibrant democracy it claims to be, but instead it is a state actor willing to use murder and violence, intimidation, threats, blackmail to achieve its goals. So that CSIS report really finally validated, for anybody who had any doubt, it finally validated what we've known all along. The advocacy for Khalistan is a lawful political movement. It is not extremism. And so standing up for Khalistan, you're not just standing up for a simple sovereign homeland. You're standing up for the principles that a foreign power cannot and should not be allowed to own our politicians, our media, or of course our medicine cabinets. So the push for Khalistan forces the West. It's opening their eyes, our leaders' eyes, in everything that we talk about. It is opening our leaders' eyes to confront dependency that we have on India. If we demand accountability for transnational oppression, we're forced to fix our own problems, this trap that we're in our pharmaceutical supply chains, amongst others. And CSIS makes it clear that only a small group of individuals plan violence, but the vast majority of the movement is peaceful, legitimate. So the Khalistan movement is not the threat. The Khalistan movement, as I said, is the canary in the coal mine. It is the one movement, the one group of people that is shouting loud, saying, "Wake up! Look what a trap we are in the West. We've been telling you for decades." It is all about revealing the truth. As I always say, the truth always prevails. The globalists want to brush India's actions under the carpet to keep the drugs flowing. But we know otherwise. So we're playing the long game. Every fellowship, every vote, every voice that speaks out against foreign interference is a step towards a world where the Sikh voice is represented and where the West is no longer held hostage by this totally questionable ally we call India. So the mask is coming off, thanks to things like the CSIS report, thanks of course to the Khalistan movement. So that's it. In other words, ultimately, as I said, the truth will prevail. Thanks to the Khalistan movement, the Sikh people highlighting so many things like this. Our leaders are slowly but surely starting to realise and wake up they can only bury these things for so long. Because ultimately, we in the West are being held hostage to a hostile nation. And that can only go on for so long before somebody finally says, enough is enough. Could Donald Trump be the guy to do that? We'll see. Time will tell. There you go. Interesting stuff. Okay, now, talk about India. And I often, sadly, have to talk about how India treats its women. The statistics, and I'll talk about some of the statistics in a moment, are just horrific. And I came across this story a couple of days ago. It is absolutely shocking. It does not belong in a nation that claims or is trying to claim itself as a future superpower. In Maharashtra's sugarcane belt, obviously where they grow sugar through sugarcane, hysterectomy has quietly emerged as a survival response among migrant women workers. Paid strictly by output, these women lose pay for every day that they miss working through menstruation, illness, and of course pregnancy. So with contractors penalising any breaks that they might take, and families are now totally dependent on seasonal earnings through the sugarcane crops, the pressure, therefore, these women are under to avoid losing any pay packet which they literally rely on to feed themselves is massive. So investigations have flagged over 13,000 hysterectomies in the region over recent years that are linked specifically to wage loss, debt, and lack of safeguards. Now, what experts are saying is they're not being forced to have these hysterectomies. These are voluntary. For those who might not be aware, a hysterectomy is where you have your womb, your actual reproductive organs removed. And once that's removed, you can't have a period. You obviously can't bear children. It's a massive operation. It is a very, very big operation. It's a very dangerous operation. And women are volunteering to have this dangerous operation, which obviously renders them completely unable to have children ever again. They are volunteering through economic coercion. Survival begins to shape irreversible medical decisions. And it points to deeper failures in the Indian state. So, we can talk about, the big stories of high-level geopolitical games and conduits or whatever. But let's not lose sight of the real human cost that is going on every day in India, specifically for women who live under a regime of perpetual fear. Now, this, sadly, is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom. This is symptomatic of a deep-seated cultural and legal crisis in India. It is shameful. In the West, we often hear, India, modernising democracy, the world's largest democracy. But for the millions of women who live there. It is a landscape where they're treated as not just second class, but even third class citizens. We're talking about a nation gripped by a sexual assault epidemic, where, for example, the victim is usually scrutinised more than the actual attacker. It's usually blamed on the victim. And I'm almost speechless because the number of stories that I have had to recount, and when James was here, the two of us used to recount about some of the horrific treatment of women in India, sexual assaults, etc. You've got to understand the context of how this is happening. The legal framework is itself shameful. In India, marital rape is still not a crime. Marital rape, it is legal in India as a husband to rape your wife. That's not a legal loophole. It is state-sanctioned declaration that a woman's body isn't her own when she's married. It belongs to her husband. And her husband can basically rape his wife every night for the rest of their lives, and nobody can do about it, least of all her. So when the state refuses to protect women within the domestic situation, it's sending a very clear message to the society at large. Female autonomy is optional. So this is an attempt, basically, to suppress women's rights on every possible level. They're maintaining domestic stability through the suppression of half the population. And let's take a look at some of the absolutely shameful statistics. According to India's national crime records, a rape is reported in India every 16 minutes on average. Now, in reality, those statistics are probably a massive underestimate of the truth. The actual number is likely exponentially higher because, of course, there is a culture of fear, social stigma, often reinforced by local law enforcement, to make sure that most rapes actually never even reported. If you're a Dalit woman, you're lower caste and you're raped, are you going to report it? Probably not, because they won't believe you. You go to the police, you probably find you'll be assaulted by the police. So rapes amongst Dalit women, the lowest caste, are more than likely not reported. So again, one rape every 16 minutes will be a massive underestimate of the true number of rapes in India. And that's before we even talk about gang rapes, sadly, all too often reported in India. There's a pattern where the state is more interested in tracking perceived threats to its image than tracking down those who are actually committing these sorts of dreadful crimes against women. Now, this matters because a government, obviously it matters to the women involved, but it matters to the world, a wider world. Because a government that can't or won't protect its own women, therefore cannot be trusted to act with integrity as a global partner. Would you ever do business with a man who knew was a rapist or a sex predator? Of course you wouldn't if you had any morals. But that is what India is expecting us to do, to trade, to shake the hands of a nation that as a nation is quite happy to preside over the rape of its women every 16 minutes at least. And we do see India labelled as a main perpetrator of interference in Western democracies. Well, if there's so little respect for the fundamental rights of its own citizens, why should we expect them to respect the sovereignty of our nations? This is the true face of India. So, again, I'm sort of rendered a little bit speechless once again about this. It's not just a news item. You know, this terrible story about the hysterectomies. It is basically, it's a demand from the rest of the world, the civilized world, the democracies of this world, to India. It needs a total overhaul of its system, of its whole state system, its treatment of women. Again, it's total lack of accountability. Who is holding the Indian government to account for stories like this, for the sexual assaults that are epidemics in India? Remember that doctor recently who was raped and murdered. A female doctor was raped and murdered in her own hospital. And thousands of people took to the streets in protest. Yeah, as they should. Only because she happened to be a doctor. She was upper caste, from a higher caste. Where are the thousands of people taking the streets for a Dalit woman that gets raped every few minutes? They only complain when it happens to one of them. Let's move on. Right, let's change tone. Here we go. The Koh-i-Noor diamond. King Charles visited New York recently. And I'm happy to say one of the people he did encounter was a Khalistani campaigner who demanded, politely of course, demanded the king, look, please, you've got to support the return of our homeland. I don't know what the king's response was. I probably ignored it, sadly. Anyway, but one of the other encounters he had was with this guy, Mamdani. Sadly, the king really was having trouble to shake off the ghosts of the British Empire. And one of those particular ghosts was, of course, the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Now, the media obviously focused on the pageantry of his royal visit. It was a bit of a try and rebuild bridges between our hopeless Prime Minister Starmer that had burnt with the Trump administration. So he sent poor King Charles to try and rebuild some of those bridges that Starmer had torched through his own incompetence. Anyway, ultimately, yes, this mayor of New York, Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani, rather cheekily, I have to say, sort of asked King Charles to return the Koh-i-Noor diamond to India. So the media sort of picked it up slightly. They were focused on other areas. But ultimately, yeah, the Koh-i-Noor story, it's a story actually we have, I think a couple of years ago, I did cover the same story. And it does have a direct impact on you guys, our audience. This is it. It is a beautiful stone. I've actually seen it myself. It is in the Tower of London in the Crown Jewels. It is actually one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. It's not the largest. I think it's actually. I did research this. It is 1/5 of the size of the largest diamond in the world. The largest diamond in the world is enormous, but this in itself is a massive diamond. It is 105 carats. It weighs about 21 grams. And it sits in, I'll show you actually, it sits in that crown there. That is the crown of Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother. She passed away, how many years ago now? Anyway, it was Queen Elizabeth's mother, the Queen Mother as she was known. That is her official crown, or was her official crown. And that is where the Koh-i-Noor diamond sits. It's an astonishing stone. If you're in the UK in London, you can go have a look at it. It's really quite a sight to behold. And of course, there it is, worn by Queen Victoria herself. There it is, sitting on Queen Victoria's chest. But the story of the Koh-i-Noor, and in fact, interestingly, if you go visit the Crown Jewels in London, as indeed I did, I think it was last year, there is a whole section in the Tower of London dedicated to the history of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. It's a very balanced history, I have to say. But I'm going to give you, for those of you who want to know, what is the history of this stone. And this Mamdani's demand, as indeed many Indians have demanded, return it to India. Well, who actually does this stone belong to? And in reality, the story isn't black and white. There is no very simple, clear claim on this stone. Now, of course, this stone originated, this gem, was in the ground. It belonged to the earth, first of all. It was actually, nobody knows for sure, but it is believed it was mined in the Koh-i-Noor mines of India. And here you go, there you go, there's a little infographic. In the southern part of India. It is believed it was mined originally in the 18th century, in the early 1700s. And it then passed through the hands of the Delhi Sultanate and then the Mughals. And in 1739, Nader Shah of Persia sacked Delhi and then took hold of the diamond. So again, mined, went up to Delhi, in come the Mughals, headed by Nader Shah, and he then basically looted it. After his assassination, it then passed to the Afghan Empire under Ahmad Shah Durrani. And then this is where the Sikh community came in. So, in 1813, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab, he of the Sikh Empire, negotiated the diamond's return from the Afghans. said, look, actually, we want it back now. So for the Sikh Empire, the Koh-i-Noor then became a symbol of Khalsa, Sikh sovereignty. So it wasn't just gold. It was, in fact, a testament to the power of the Khalsa. It became symbolic of the Khalsa itself. So the British claim they then obtained the diamond legitimately through the Treaty of Lahore in 1849. Of course, this is the annexation of the Sikh Empire. In comes the British Empire, takes control of India, comes across the Sikh Empire, the Anglo-Sikh Wars, etc. 1849, they then sat down to negotiate essentially the surrender of the Sikh Empire. The Treaty of Lahore 1849, that then was signed by the Sikhs with the British to essentially settle peace between all warring factions, and then the British essentially took control of the Sikh Empire. But who was the signatory in that Treaty of Lahore on behalf of the Sikhs? It was, in fact, Maharaja Duleep Singh, a child. He was barely 10 years old. And again, we've talked about poor Duleep Singh. He was snatched away from his mother. He was basically the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire. And he was, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. He was abducted, hijacked, captured, controlled. I don't know. Basically, he was taken by the British and brought back to the UK. Wasn't it UK then? Back to Great Britain. And his mother, Maharani Jindan, was then imprisoned. So it's a very sad story. But young Duleep signed this treaty as a young kid. I mean, was it a treaty or was he basically signed under duress? He was a 10-year-old. Under international law today, of course, a contract signed by a 10-year-old under military occupation, I mean, wouldn't even reach court. Of course, it wouldn't stand. But of course, you're in a different time. And the British didn't win the diamond basically in any sort of fair trade. They basically, it was in reality, it was a trophy of war signed off by a child whose empire they'd just dismantled. So in other words, the Treaty of Lahore it's on paper, but in reality, would it stand up to any sort of scrutiny? Probably not. Ultimately, it was a spoil of war for the British. You can't package it up in any other way. Now, the Republic of India today often demands the diamond's return, but there is a big historical flaw in their argument. The diamond was taken from the Sikh Empire, a distinct sovereign entity that totally predates the modern India by over a century. India didn't exist when the Sikh Empire owned the Koh-i-Noor diamond. So the Indian claim is based on the idea of a modern geographic succession that didn't exist in those days. The Sikh claim is based on the fact that the diamond was originally the private property of the Sikh crown, taken through the illegal coercion of the last Sikh Maharaja. So really, ultimately, if the diamond is to be returned, it should go to a state that is currently listed, let me rephrase this. Should the diamond be returned to India, who actually the Western world is already labelling as a hostile nation, or does it in fact belong to the lineage of the Khalsa from whom it was actually taken? Well, the British are arguing that the return of the stone would set a legal precedent that would in turn then empty that Tower of London of the Crown Jewels, because most of the Crown Jewels have been looted from the British Empire ultimately. So ultimately, it's complicated. There is no black and white answer really to this. The diamond has been a Persian prize, an Afghan treasure, and of course a Sikh symbol. But the most recent documented and legally contested transfer was from the Sikh Empire to the British Crown. So ultimately, there's no right and wrong answer to this. Even lawyers would spend a decade arguing, who does the Koh-i-Noor diamond belong to? Ultimately, the Sikhs have probably a more valid claim than anybody else over it. But the real owner of the stone is the earth itself. It belongs to the earth from whence it came. So I'll leave that up to you guys to argue forevermore about who the Koh-i-Noor diamond belongs to. But there it is, beautiful stone. And there it is currently where it resides in the Crown Jewels, in the Queen Mother's crown. Beautiful stone. Why do we fight over a shiny stone? There's a subject for a whole other discussion. Right, let's move on to our comments column. Running out of time now. Let's zip through our comments. Thank you to all of you, as always. Manveer starts us off with a couple of comments. Thank you for this. Yes, my educational journey. I went through that Khalistan document, the result of the Sabak de Khalsa 40 years anniversary. This new document. And this document referred to some phraseology which I actually didn't know or understood. And as part of my learning journey, thank you to you guys. As you always come up trumps, you're always there to help me in learning things that I need to know. Thank you. Begimpura and Halimi Raj, these two terms that featured a lot in this document. Thank you, Manbir, for helping me translate these. They mean roughly, Begimpura is city, land of no sorrow. So a land of joy, effectively. And the rule or the governance of humility, Halimi Raj. Both terms are from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Yes, they are part of a poetic, philosophical discourse. But yeah, as you rightly say, it is what we're aspiring to. So Begimpura and Halimi Raj are just these pillars that form the foundation of what Khalistan will be. So when people ask, what is Khalistan? What does it stand for? Well, obviously look at the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. But it is things like Begimpura and Halimi Raj. Thank you for that. And then, likewise, thank you, as indeed Narenjit Singh Saini helped me on this other one. Bipper India. What is Bipper India? I didn't know, and I did Google it, and I couldn't find an answer. And I knew you guys would help me out, as indeed I asked the question. Thank you. As you rightly say, it is basically referring to the Brahmanical section of India. It is the ruling elite. It is the upper caste ruling elite, Brahmanism. Hindutva, as you rightly say. Ultimately, it is those who control India. So that is Bipper India. Thank you for letting me know. Those of you out there who might not also have known what Bipper India means. Now you know, and now I know. Thank you for that. And Narenjit does obviously tell me, thanks Angus for bringing this document to our notice. That is why I'm here. I'm here just to be talking about conduits. I'm here as a conduit to help you guys know what's going on out there and the truth that we all need to be aware of. Stay safe. Yes. Okay, this is a couple of comments. And oh dear, this is again a whole rabbit hole of discussions. The relationship with Pakistan, the relationship with the Muslim population. It is a relationship that often talk about that the BJP, the RSS and Hindutva try very hard from every possible opportunity to drive a wedge between its minority populations, primarily Sikhs and Muslims. And it is a very complex relationship, as I often say, between Sikhs and Muslims, whether domestically in India or across the diaspora. So every opportunity the Indian media will take to drive a wedge between Pakistan and Sikhs and Muslims and Sikhs. And stay safe, you rightly point out. During Operation Sindoor, that blow-up after the Pahalgam terror attacks, again, arguably, that was a false flag, again to try and turn people against Muslims and Muslim extremists. That's not to say Muslim extremism doesn't exist, that's a different conversation, but ultimately, ordinary Muslims with ordinary Sikhs, they're trying every possible angle to drive a wedge between. And of course, we have this whole discussion. The Khalistan movement is financed by Pakistan and Pakistan's intelligence service, ISI. No, it's not. It really, really is not, as we often have to say. But that doesn't mean to say that Pakistan, there's nothing wrong with Pakistan supporting the idea of Khalistan. And indeed, ISI supporting it because it helps ISI's interests as well. Doesn't necessarily mean they're supporting us or financing us. I wish they were. How nice it would be. But they're not. They don't need to, because the support for Khalistan is so strong amongst the diaspora and indeed in Punjab. They don't need to finance it or fund it, whatever, because it's powerful enough as it is. But they're more than happy to help it along. What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. Anyway, Punjab jumps in. Likewise, but that idiot, that academic, again, I'm rendered almost speechless again about that academic who made it his case to say Sikhs are not a martial race. It was a complete and utter fabrication. It was made up by the British Empire. It was nonsense, which obviously, as I forensically tore apart the argument, it's not nonsense. Sikhs are a martial race that goes back centuries, even before the British Empire even existed. Anyway, as you rightly say, yes, you point to, and again, this is an interesting dynamic in what I've just been talking about. It was the Sikhs, essentially, in India-Pakistan wars, it's the Sikhs who actually helped win that war once again. It is the Sikhs who once again bail India out of a tricky situation against Pakistan. So actually Sikhs have fought heroically against Pakistan. But again, it points to this point. Why are Sikhs so often, they do their best to be loyal to India, and what does India do in return? Betrays them at every turn. Sikhs have literally given their lives for India. And what does India do? Treats them like third-class citizens. Anyway, as I say, complex dynamics. Uncanny wizard. This is an interesting one. Right, yes. Your proposal. If people don't believe us about, you can't advocate for Khalistan openly in India because basically you get arrested. So what Uncanny Wizard is very bravely and courageously offering to do is you will go to Punjab airport so you can take your Khalistan flag and you'll stand there and tell Amit Shah, come on then, if you think it hard enough, and have all the world's cameras there watching to see what happened and see if your peaceful protest will end well. Yes, and exactly. I don't suggest you do it, but I think the point is well made. We know full well what will happen because sadly it happens over and over again. So well done, Uncanny Wizard, for being for volunteering to be the one to prove to the world. Sadly, unfortunately, there have been many people who've gone before you. Amritpal Singh is a prime example, who sadly have already demonstrated to the world. And the problem is the world's ignoring it. That's why we need to keep highlighting the very fact of what's going on. So thank you for your voluntary saver on that one. Avtar, yes, Avtar Dylan, yes. I did. I gave you a little bit of a talking to, didn't I, yesterday? So look, stop being defeatist. Don't just hope that you might get a bit of autonomy. Absolutely right. Reach for the stars. Thank you, Avtar, for taking this on board. Indeed, because all of us have to be completely committed in the belief that Khalistan is going to happen. Don't settle or compromise for second best. There is no second best in sovereignty. There is sovereignty or not. We are fighting for sovereignty. Because, as you rightly say, India is doing everything it can to demoralise the Panth. All the way from 1947 through Blue Star, as you talk about. As you say, it's like asking the fox to guard the chickens, asking India to look after you. It won't. So the only solution, we know what the only solution is. Jasbir Kaur and Amarjit Singh Nagra, they know what the solution is. It's the truth. Good information. Both of you, thank you. But as I often say, I rely on you guys for feeding me interesting truths that I need to regurgitate, because it is this good information that is winning the war. It is this good information that finally is getting through to the people of India. The truth of what's really going on. The truth of essentially the prison cell that they are living their lives in. TC, hello TC. Very informative show, likewise. Yes, only because I'm here because of you guys feeding me the information so I can ensure that more people know about it. Talking of which, get out there. Tell more people that we exist. We do need to get the numbers up. So thank you for your kind words. As you rightly say, Raj Karega Khalsa, Khalistan Zindabad, Bachchan Kaur Bachchan. And I had to use a little bit of technology to translate this, but I think even I can start to understand what most of this means now. Sikhs for Justice Zindabad, the Khalistan referendum Zindabad, it's all there. Sukha Singh, likewise. Khalistan Zindabad. Have faith, have hope. Don't worry. Don't lose faith, it is coming. Every day that passes is another story that reinforces this belief that Khalistan is getting close. All the stepping stones are lining up. All the legal arguments are falling into place. All the reports that we need, CSIS, the intelligence agencies, they know what India is up to. All this is this multilateral approach to the Khalistan movement that is proving to the world and everybody who needs to know, every decision maker, that there is not just a valid argument for Khalistan, it is an inevitability that Khalistan is required, is needed, is obliged, is demanded. Pick your words, it doesn't matter. But it's coming. Because the people always win in the end. Democracy always wins in the end. And Khalistan is the ultimate sharp end of democracy. It is the ultimate model of democracy. Again, as history has proven, just look what happened in Eastern Europe. Democracy always wins in the end. Authoritarian regimes fall eventually. They all do without exception. They will all fall. Every single one of them. Because the people are many. They are few. Which is why Khalistan will win. So there you go. Positive notes. Good heavens, is that the end of a week already? It is indeed. I've got a podcast tomorrow, Dr. Groel, a fascinating one. Do watch that. It'll be uploaded, all being well, tomorrow morning UK time. And do keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Do keep your comments coming in. Do message me at message@satledgetv.com, as indeed many of you have been doing. Thank you for highlighting all sorts of interesting stuff, which of course have formed many of our stories. So I do rely on you guys to keep feeding me stuff that I need to know about, particularly if it's on the ground in Punjab, whatever. Very hard to get the truth out of Punjab. So let me know what you know is going on the ground, and then I can do a bit of digging myself. But that's it for another day, indeed another week. Watch my podcast tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching. Have a great week. I will see you next time.